I believe we are now live.
Fantastic. Okay, so we'll commence the proceedings of the day. Kia ora. Welcome everybody that's on screen, and fantastic to be involved with some deliberations with the Selwyn District Council, Mayor Sam, and your CEO. I've yet to meet CEO Sharon and the rest of your team. We'll just open up with karakia, and we'll go through some introductions from our side. Pass over to your side for introductions, and then we'll get into the proceedings of the day. And I've got a couple of other observations that I'll make, but I'll just open with karakia. Whakataka taho ki te uru, whakataka taho ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, ki hi aki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he heihu, ti hei Māori ora. Just one other observation when we're doing hearings such as this is always there's always little challenges, but probably the main thing you'll note is if commissioners have got their heads down, we're taking notes. It's not that we're not interested in the proceedings. It's the one thing I don't like about doing hearings online. But just I'll make that observation. We'll go through the process. We'll listen to the appellant, and obviously we've invited the Melbourne Community Board to come along as well. We'd like to get some of their observations. If we've got particular questions that can't be answered immediately, they can be held over for the right of reply, and then I think we should follow a pretty good process from there. So we'll just commence with introductions from commissioners first and staff, and then, as I say, Mayor Sam, will pass over to you. So maybe Commissioner Ball, would you like to commence it? Just get you to go off mute. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and pleased to be joining you today. My name is Gwen Bull, and I've been a long time in local government, including chair of the Auckland Regional Council and some time on the commission in previous years as well. Long history in local government. Thank you.
Very good. Commissioner Begum.
O tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi o te wā, he uri tēnei no Taranaki maunga, no ngā ruahine me te Atiawa. Kia ora everybody, I'm Bonita Begum. I come from Taranaki, we're from Ngā Ruahine and Te Atiawa iwi. I'm in my 5th term in local government, 3 as a district councillor in South Taranaki, 1 as a community board member in South Taranaki, and I'm currently the Māori ward councillor for Taranaki Regional Council. Who've also served in LGNZ positions as Te Maruata Chair and National Council member and Community Board Executive Committee member as well. So grateful for your time today, and looking forward to working with you.
Good on, Benita. I'm Brendan Duffy, the chair of the commission, and have had 21 years involvement in local government, 12 of those as mayor of the Horowhenua District Council. And on National Council as well, zone chairs, chair DHB for a term. So been involved for quite some time, and had the last 8 years on the Local Government Commission, with the last 5 as chair. So that's the background there. So I suppose it gives you a little bit of a sense that the 3 commissioners do have a little bit of a grounding in local government over a long period of time. So I'll just pass over to CEO Penny to introduce herself and team.
Kia ora koutou. Technical difficulties on our end. Emma and I are in the same room but using separate laptops, so we just had to have a little conversation about whose buttons were on and off. I am Penny Langley. I'm the Chief Executive of the Local Government Commission. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today, and I will ask my team to introduce themselves directly, and we'll start with EJ.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko EJ Ruthven tōku ingoa. I'm EJ, I'm a Senior Advisor with the Local Government Commission. It's been a privilege to be the lead advisor for Selwyn District Council's review this time, and I'm really happy to be here today. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou, ko Linda Candon tōku ingoa. I'm also a Senior Advisor with the Local Government Commission, and I'm Here essentially is backup today, so I'm very happy to be here supporting the hearing. Thanks.
Kia ora, my name's Emma. I will be running the chat today.
Well, you got away with that pretty easily, Emma. Okay, me and Sam will pass over to you.
Kia ora koutou, ko Sam Broughton, tōku ingoa, a kora matua o Kirikiri. Kia ora, I'm Sam, and I'm the Mayor of Selwyn. Have been in this role since 2016 and on our council since 2010, and I'm currently the President of Local Government New Zealand as well. So yeah, enjoy what local government is able to do for local communities. And representation reviews is one of those roles. And I want to just thank the Commission for their time today, but also I know this isn't your only hearing for councils, so that I guess the breadth and care that you have for councils across Aotearoa to ensure that we have good governance and representation on our councils so that people can be fairly heard and good decisions made across Aotearoa. I'll hand to my right and we'll just go around the table and we can introduce ourselves.
Kia ora, ko Philip Dean tōku ingoa, ko kai kaunihera for Selwyn. I am a councillor for Rolleston first term, and I am the chair of our local representation review, so which puts me here.
Kia ora koutou, ko Sarah Canusa tōku ingoa. I'm the communications manager here at Selwyn District Council and worked on the consultation activity.
Tēnā koutou katoa, Steve Giving tōku ingoa. I'm the Executive Director of People, Culture and Capability here at Selwyn District Council.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Sharon Mason tōku ingoa. I am the Chief Executive of Selwyn District Council. I've been in the role for the past 18 months. So, and I just want to express my thanks to EJ for the support that you've given, and Tim Harris, who actually led the representation reviews, sadly unwell and is unable to be with us today.
Thank you, and I'd just like to acknowledge mana whenua, Te Taumu to Anaitu Hereri, who are our partners in caring for this place. Although I've been caring it for much longer than Selwyn District's been around, but continue to care for it with us now, and we have a seat on our council. Megan Mackay is Taumu representative on our council and on our subcommittees as well, and Phil will talk a little bit about their decision not to participate here as a seat on a representation review committee. But the partnership that we have with them is deeply important to us, so just acknowledge them at the beginning of this hearing.
Perfect. Thanks for all the introductions. So Mayor Sam will pass directly to you for your introduction, and I think you've got a slide pack as well.
We do. So we'll chuck the slides up. There's a few of us that are going to speak to it, and happy to take questions, either interrupt us or at the end as you see fit, Chair. Great, so hopefully you can see the first slide, which is just a title page, and I'm going to run through where we're at currently, some of the needs and drivers for change and the timeline of events, and then I'll hand over to Phil, who led the early parts of the process on the subcommittee. So at the moment, Selwyn District is broken into 4 wards. Everybody is elected from those wards except for the Mayor, who's elected at large. Melvin has 2 councillors. Ellesmere has 2 councillors. Springs and Rolleston both have 3 councillors. And the dark blue and the light blue areas that you can see on that map are the more rural wards within Selwyn, mostly farmland, but dotted with many small towns throughout. And I'll show you some maps later that sort of speak to the number of small towns that we have. And then the green area and the purple areas are Springs and Rolleston. Rolleston has basically at the moment a ward boundary that's hard up against the urban side of the town, and not taking into account any of the land or lifestyle blocks that sit around it. And Springs encompasses Lincoln and Prebbleton. We have 1 community board that sits across Melvin. They have 5 members, and there's 3 subdivisions within the Melvin ward. We used to have another community board, and a number of years ago, the Commission was involved in a decision, and that was disestablished at that time. It was a Selwyn Central ward, which was Rolleston and West Melton formed that Selwyn Central Ward at that time. It's going to speak to the need for change. So a district, we're the fastest growing district in the country. There's a lot of people moving here all the time, but where people are moving to isn't equally spread across the geography of our district. We made a commitment to you at the previous representation review when we also had challenges around setting our boundaries and representation, that we would come back in 3 years' time to relook at the boundaries, and that's why we did the representation review over these last couple of years as well. We want to make sure that we are future-proofing our decision-making so we don't have to continually change things every 3 years and provide some stability. And in the past, it's been the towns of Burnham and West Melton that have kind of been moved around to make up plus or minus 10% to be able to keep 2 representatives in Ellesmere and Melvin, the rural wards, with West Melton joining Melvin recently. And although they had historically been a farming place until sort of post-earthquake, and Burnham, in my time on council, I remember them moving out of connection to the more urban side of the district into Ellesmere so that Ellesmere could keep 2 councillors as well. So for different reasons, or for the same reason, but to different wards, those 2 towns have kind of been the thing that's moved most regularly in the representation reviews that I have been a part of. We've seen extreme variation in some of our mesh blocks, so over 400% growth in some of our mesh blocks, which just shows the pace of change in the last 3 years. The extreme growth has occurred around the district, but some of it makes it quite difficult to get and meet the plus or minus 10% rule without significant boundary changes from where we are currently. So Phil will talk to this later, but we tried to search pretty far and wide at different models that we could move to that would help us continue with communities of interest, as well as meeting the other fair and effective representation and plus or minus 10%. I'll just move now to the timeline. So in April 2023, we had a diverse group, including a youth council representative, and actually we ended up having 2 youth councillors on the subcommittee, and we also had the community board on the subcommittee to look at the representation review. We confirmed that first past the post electoral system would be the one that we use, and I'd say that was actually one of the decisions. The timing of this decisions was something that annoyed many people on the rep review committee. Having to make that FPP call early didn't seem to make sense when we might have chosen a different boundary system or way of electing elected members if we had made a different decision then. And also the availability of Stats NZ numbers to base our decisions on were already old by the time we were able to use them in a fast-growing district. I'll speak to this probably a little bit later, but we already know there's 5,000 extra people in Selwyn now than there were using the numbers that the representation review had to use. And they're not concentrated. They are concentrated in particular parts of the district. They're not spread evenly. So the timing of the way we have to make decisions did cause some extra conversation. In November 2023, we worked with local Runaka and their advice was that they did not wish to establish Māori wards, and so we did not establish Māori wards. February 2024, the subcommittee reviewed over 20 different ward structure options. We brought in Murray State, who guided us through this process. Murray is an expert in the industry, has worked with us previously along with a number of other councils, and I'm sure you're experienced with Murray's work. It was really good to have his involvement and lead. The only thing we didn't have was Murray was unavailable to be with us when council made their final decision on our deliberations. So some of that expertise was missing on our final decision day. April 2024, we took 2 main options to the community, we whittled them down to that. In July 24, we adopted an initial proposal for consultation, and over the next few weeks we heard from our community through hearings, and then council coming to its decision and it being publicly notified. I'll let Phil now talk through some of the research that was undertaken, and Sarah will also speak to that as well. Phil.
Thanks, Sam. I just wanted to pick up what Sam was saying about the committee was made up of councillors from each of the wards. So that's where our consultation started, to make sure that we were going right out to the areas as much as we can. The youth councillors, the 2 youth councillors and the community board were important to us too. We also had an open invitation to mana whenua to be at our meetings, to be involved at anywhere that they can. And as Sam said, we were having lots of input from them, and of course the mayor, and guided by Murray State, who basically was there all the time to keep us on track, make sure that we weren't missing anything, make sure that our processes were going well. Leading the meeting, I wanted to make sure that those meetings were always clear of that we're representing our district. The meetings were live streamed, so they were available to anyone. In fact, those meetings are still on YouTube. We focus our attention on the plus or minus 10%. But also a big part of that was around communities of interest. So our big challenge was always around how do we make sure that our communities of interest are reflected in our equations. We received a lot of information, and we spoke to our peers around councils. We spoke to Kapiti District Council, Hamilton City Council, Nelson City Council, and Ashburton. We chose them because they all had a separate version of how they elected their councillors, how they worked out their ward boundaries, and we wanted as much information as we possibly could to add to our information pool. Then we went through and did some qualitative and some quantitative research commissioned to canvass residents' views of communities of interest, and what fair and effective representation looked like. So again, that communities of interest thing was right at the forefront of all of our thinking around that. The survey has a margin of error of 4.8% at 95% confidence level, which I'm going to pass to you in a minute, Sarah. And this level is precision is consistent with the standard reliability benchmarks. I'm going to pass over to Sarah now, who's going to give a bit of the feedback on what the information told us.
Thanks, Phil. So as Phil's mentioned, and as part of the process, the subcommittee commissioned independent research across September and November of 2023, and that was conducted by a research company that at the time was known as Research First. So to do this, they undertook a 2-stage process covering both qualitative and quantitative research methods. And in total, 558 people from across the district were involved. And there was an intentional oversampling of typically underrepresented groups within that research as well, which included Māori and Pacific populations. As Phil mentioned, the survey had a margin of error of 4.9% and a 95% confidence level, which is consistent with standard reliability benchmarks in market research. So this shows some of the, I guess, the highlights from the research that we received. 80% of people researched didn't feel represented, 70% didn't like the current ward structure, 35% rely on Rolleston daily, and 45% of Springs residents work outside the district. So what the research did was it gave us a bit of a picture of how our community was feeling about the current representation model, and also some of their, I guess, day-to-day activities that then help to inform the community of interest. So the key findings were that the community identified more with their township than with their ward, and many didn't know which ward they belonged to. While they identified with their township, many people in the district engage in work, play and access services within their local communities, and there was a bit of a sense that Rolleston gets a lot of council's attention. Further to this, the research showed 70% of residents were dissatisfied or ambivalent about their current representation, which suggested to the group that there was notable appetite for revising the representation framework to represent those changing needs of the community. So further to that research around identity connected to ward and identifying more with township than ward, many residents, when asked to describe themselves, they would say that they lived in Selwyn or Canterbury when speaking to outsiders, which indicated a broader regional identity. At that regional identity, and as mentioned on the other slide, 35% of people depend on Rolleston for their daily needs. The current Springs ward demonstrates a functional reliance on Christchurch, with 45% of residents working outside of Selwyn. And the current Springs ward is the bit that does have a boundary with the Christchurch City Council. Lincoln, Darfield, Burnham and Rolleston strongly connect to their specific townships over the neighbourhood or the broader district. We did also receive some feedback from councillors that Burnham relies heavily on Rolleston for services and should be part of a ward that includes Rolleston. There was a sense that local representation is best for dealing with local issues. One significant change from the research was the connection to West Melton with Febbleton and Lincoln. So in the past, West Melton was perceived as part of a rural community, but the research indicates that West Melton residents view themselves as a distinct group within the district. Part of that is that unless councillor numbers were increased above the current level, West Melton were unable to have separate individual representation due to the ±10% rule. Councillor numbers were discussed and a desire for the same or lower numbers were expressed by the subcommittee group. With regards to the community board findings within this research, there was findings that indicated Melbourne residents who do currently have a community board tend to lean more towards their councillor for representation rather than going to the community board. This was true across the research respondents with 401 people. So in that first tranche of research, when they were asked the question, who is primarily responsible for representing residents' interests and opinions, only 7% of that group indicated the community board, with 33% answering the councillor. So that's kind of an overview of where that independent research was at. In terms of the numbers, you'll see as we move through the consultation activity that the numbers for that research was quite consistent with the number that we got for the preliminary research as well, with preliminary consultation.
Thank you, Sarah. So these maps are really just to give you a sense of the communities of interest within our district. The map on the left is the number of primary schools and the primary school zones that we have. We've got over 20 towns. We've got the most number of towns in our district compared to any district in Canterbury. So we stretch from Southbridge school zone out on the coast right up to the furthest west town is Arthur's Pass, but the furthest west school zone is Springfield, Sheffield, Glentunnel, Colgate. Colgate's always part of Glentunnel zone. Greendale, Kirwee, West Melton, Springston, Leaston, Broadfield. There's all these schools, and maybe you know some of those towns as well. And that really speaks to what Sarah was saying. People feel very connected to their local town because most of our towns have local schools that people connect to. And so particularly for primary school age people and families, there's a real deep connection to that local town. And so less interest in what the ward structure might be because of that. The secondary school zones on the right-hand side start to show some correlation between another map that I'm going to show you, which is the Greater Christchurch Partnership map. It also is reflective of the previous councils pre-1989, where we had a Melbourne Council and Ellesmere Council, and those rural spaces still and schools still sort of maintain some of those boundaries from there as well. But secondary school zones show really close similarities to the option that the subcommittee chose as their preferred option, and because the communities of interest are quite strong around that secondary school zoning. It includes sports, cultural groups, and other things that are connected in those schools places, because schools really are the community building blocks of our district. It's a place where kids gather, where families make friends for life, where parents interact with one another, and so looking at the school zones was important for us. And as I said, Melbourne and Ellesmere follow those traditional lines. I think the next map has the overlay, or is that the? Can we just go forward to the GCP two or three.
Yeah.
That one, yeah. So this map I've included so that you can see the work that we're doing spatially as far as spatial planning with Greater Christchurch. So the Greater Christchurch Partnership is Christchurch City Council, Waimakariri District Council, Selwyn District Council, Environment Canterbury and Ngāi Tahu, all working together saying, how do what is the relationship between all of our towns and these boundaries that we put on a map? Like, we drive across them every day, our economies are joint, what's actually going on here? And so the map on the left-hand side is our spatial planning map, and it shows that the areas of West Melton, Rolleston, Lincoln and Prebleton are all deeply connected to Greater Christchurch. So they're all small, medium to Rolleston, large-sized towns on the urban fringes of Christchurch. And so that was part of the decision-making that the subcommittee made around, although West Melton and Lincoln aren't the same community of interest, they are communities with the same sorts of interests as far as connections to Rolleston and connections to Christchurch, and are quite different than communities that sit in the Ellesmere and Melvin wards. And the map on the right-hand side shows the whole Greater Christchurch Partnership area, which is inside the bold line. And again, it's just another line on a map, but that is used across our council for planning purposes. It's used for our engagement with communities on particular topics, and again, closely mirrors the decision that the subcommittee made around communities of interest, because it's work that our community has understood for the last, coming up 20 years around the Greater Christchurch Partnership table. It's not 50 years old. It's not what grandparents are thinking about when they think about our district, but it's what families are now, and the 50-odd thousand people that have moved here in the last 20 years, that is the Selwyn that they know. If we could just go back to the subcommittee decisions, and I'll get Phil to speak to that.
So as Sam said before, based on the advice that we received from the subcommittee, the recommendations were around Mary wards, and around the recommendation for that went through council on the 15th of November 2023, and the first past the post was adopted as the confirmed by council on September 23. We then had to also look at which scenarios we weren't going to move forward with. And if you go to the next slide, there's a number of slides there, and I know it's a pictorial mess, but it basically it's there to show you some idea of the number of slides that we were looking at. We had many options that we were going through, ranging from 0 wards to 6 wards, ranging from 7 councillors through to 11 councillors. You'll notice on there, if I can draw your attention to the bottom line, the second one in, is actually the one that, if I'm jumping forward now, that council finally decided we, as a subcommittee, had discounted that. We didn't feel that it reflected the communities of interest well enough. It was sticking with our status quo. It was, but it had meant that West Rolleston and Burnham, who are basically both on the boundaries of Rolleston, were looking towards Leaston and Ellesmere as their I guess their parent town. And of course, one of them, West Rolleston, well, it's in the name, it's part of Rolleston, and we effectively drawn an arbitrary line through Rolleston and said this side's Rolleston, that side's not. Which not only was it a community of interest, it just didn't make sense. It was an arbitrary line that we'd drawn so we discounted that for that reason. Similar to Burnham, West Melton was in the same thing. As Sam was just saying, previously they were looking at towards Melvin as their community of interest. That didn't make sense. And in the past, when West Melton was maybe a smaller rural place, that may have made sense, but this was a change that we were challenging ourselves with, saying they actually reflect themselves more closer to that Springs ward, where a lot of their people were leaving there to work in Christchurch. And their focus was towards Rolleston or Christchurch. So putting them, they were very similar. As Sam was saying, their community of interest was fitted very clean with us. So we discounted that that one there, and that focused more on. And I think I'm passing over back to you, Sam.
Yeah, as you go past that Greater Christchurch Partnerships map again, just one thing I will say is that just to give you a sense of the feel of the place as you drive through it, if you just go back one slide, so yeah, that one. If you're inside that Greater Christchurch area, which is around West Melton, Rolleston, Prebbleton and Lincoln, the rural land that's around you is 4-hectare lifestyle blocks. And so, because that's the planning zones that we have there. Once you cross over that line, it's 20 and some pockets and 40-hectare minimums. So that's where you start to really feel the difference when you drive through our district around how the land use is changing based on that Greater Christchurch Partnership line. Thank you, Sarah.
Great. So 2 main options were submitted for community feedback following subcommittee direction. Pre-engagement was 4 weeks long and occurred throughout April 2024. So the 2 options that were taken were option 1 was 4 wards with 8 councillors and no community boards. Option 2 was 3 wards with 10 councillors and no community boards. We also looked at naming convention and just a more broader question around community boards across all wards, people's feedback around community boards generally. A total of 229 submissions were received in the preliminary engagement. Of the 2 proposed options, more submitters preferred option 1 to option 2. And in addition, there were, to the 229 submissions that we received, we also received 219 responses that were collected by the Darfield Residents Association and Melbourne Community Board. As part of the review, we did the name stuff and asked the community about naming of the wards. This was done using a message board with voting thumbs ups or downs and comments to people's suggestions, which helped to guide that conversation. In total, we had 1,200 people visit the online site for submissions. 229 people submitted responses, as I mentioned. 47 people contributed ideas for the naming of the wards. This is just a summary of some of the overarching themes for this preliminary engagement, which included a desire to see more councillors around the table rather than less, given the district's growth, and strong preferences from our rural communities for community boards related to the geography of the region, especially if option 2, which was a 3-ward model, was continued to be considered. There were also concerns around the cost of community boards and division in the community around naming convention. In terms of the preliminary consultation, we didn't feel we were successful in understanding if the community wanted a community board as a general concept around the district, but it did highlight that rural communities did want greater representation.
If you move to the next one there, the initial proposed consultation, the council adopted its initial proposal for public consultation on July 24, 2024. Under this proposal, the existing ward structure was largely retained with the major changes proposed from the current electoral. So council adopted to reduce the number of councillors from 10 to 8, which having the mayor elected at large, and to maintain the 4 wards with some boundary changes, and obviously the renaming of the wards. The moves were to have Burnham into Rolleston, which also moved West Rolleston into Rolleston, and to move West Melton into the Springs ward. We also recommended no community board. Public consultation on the initial proposal was undertaken from the 8th of August to the 12th of September, and on this initial proposal.
I'll just add in there if I can as well.
Can I just interrupt I'm sorry, but would you be kind enough? Could you go back one slide just for a moment, please? So hold on, I just want to get my. So pre-engagement is a strong message around, where the heck is it? A higher level of representation from parts of our communities. Desire for more. So pre-engagement, there's a comment there that showed a desire for more councillors. And then go to the next slide, please. And then in this one, the initial proposal is to reduce the number of councillors. So Sam, when you get to a point of making some comment, can you quantify that for us? Don't do it now. Don't want to interrupt too much, but I'm struggling to understand how that works.
Come back to that.
Thank you. Right, I'm sorry to have interrupted you, Steve.
Awesome. So sorry, just back to the other slide there. I just wanted to make a comment around the feedback that we received from the community regarding preliminary engagement, is that they wanted to see the initial proposal consultation promoted in a particular way. And so we took that feedback on board and promoted the activity and let people know this was happening through local papers alongside widespread traditional and digital advertising. We also had face-to-face drop-in sessions across each ward, and we responded to requests from the Community Board and Residents Association in terms of how they wanted that to be advertised. We also used the same process for this consultation as we did for our long-term plan, and used the same technology to support the consultation activity. Hearings were held on Thursday the 26th and Friday the 27th of September, with council deliberations on the 10th of October. I'll go into more detail on the next slide regarding the demographics of respondents, but within hearings, those who identified as residing in Darfield, which is part of the Melbourne district, made up 43% of those who indicated they wished to be heard. What we find with most of our consultation activity is some of those numbers drop off. So the ratio of those who made it to hearings to speak meant that 70% of those heard on hearings days were from Darfield, which was 25 out of the 35 who fronted. We did a lot of analysis around the location of those providing feedback into the consultation process to ensure there was a balance of voices, noting that sometimes consultation activity can involve those most passionate about a topic and may not necessarily represent the full community voice. This here shows the breakdown of submission by town, which are those dots, so you can see the geographic location there. And again, the majority of responses were received from Darfield as a township, which made up 27% of the total submissions received. Within that, 67% of the total response came from the Melbourne ward, which is indicated in the dark blue on the top of the map there. So question 1 in consultation asked about ward boundaries and number of councillors. 613 submissions were received in total, and of these, 100 were in favour of the proposal and 498 were not. That equated to 83% not in support, and of those, 64% were from Melbourne. Of those from Rolleston, 59% were in favour of the proposal. Springs were not in favour, with 58% against a change, and 76% of those in Ellesmere were opposed. Those who supported the initial proposal felt it would ensure fair and equitable representation and support a modern and adaptable approach, therefore fulfilling the requirements of the Act. There was also support for boundary changes to better reflect current and future population and the efficiencies they believed would come from a reduction in councillors. Those opposed contained similar themes, but in reverse. Notably, there was concern for rural representation due to the large geographical size and diverse needs of the proposed Ward 1. They felt reducing councillors would create more work and inefficiencies from having to travel larger distances. There was also additional concern around urban versus rural representation being impacted. Question 2 asked about removing the Community Board from Melbourne. Of the 607 submissions we received on this question, we received 100 submitters in support of the proposal and 496 submitters who did not support the proposal. The majority were in favour of the removal, especially in Melbourne. Again, Rolleston submitters did support the removal of community boards, with 68% in favour. Those who supported the initial proposal did not think it was fair to have one community board in one area and could lead to over-representation in that one space. There were concerns from this group around community disengagement from previous dysfunction that was demonstrated through poor voter turnout in a recent by-election. There were views that both modern communication and other means such as community advisors or groups better support local issues. Those opposed were concerned about losing their community voice and felt that removing the community board would result in less community engagement and participation. They felt community boards supported councillors in their ward, and given the proposed reduction of a councillor in Ward 1 and large geographic area, it would be necessary to maintain the community board to ensure effective representation. Ward names. So question 3 asked the community if they supported dual language names, sorry. We received 591 responses on this question. Of these, 185 supported dual names and 396 did not. 67% were not in support, so that's the percentage. And of these, 69% from Melbourne did not support. Of those who voted in Rolleston, 63% did not support a name change. Springs also did not support with 73%, and 80% in those in Ellesmere opposed the use of dual language names. Those who did support the initial proposal for naming felt it was time for supporting biculturalism and saw this as a way of acknowledging the district's history and moving forward. Those who were opposed cited concerns at associated costs, potential confusion at having two names, and a general preference for English names for familiarity and ease of use. There was sentiment within this group to have English names at first ahead of Māori if it was to be adopted. We then also gave the opportunity for people to provide additional comments. This helped to gather some key insights into community thinking, especially on the themes of rural representation, maintaining or increasing representation, calling for effective and transparent governance, concerns around cost and efficiency related to the community board, and also this process and the name changes for wards, and support for local voices, the importance of rural voices, and fear of losing their representation as some towns become more urban. So then in terms of the staff feedback to the consultation, it's kind of noted here, taking into account the initial independent research and also discussions that had taken place prior to the initial proposal consultation. So in the communities of interest in ward boundaries, it was felt that 4 wards are well understood and accepted. The 2 principally rural wards have traditional local representation, so those 2 were listed as wards 1 and 3. The 2 rural wards are also geographically manageable in size. West Melton was grouped with the township of Lincoln and Prebleton, which it felt there was the community of interest in having the similar interests and connection to Christchurch. Burnham was grouped with Rolleston, which also had similar interests as mentioned by Phil earlier. And in terms of the geography aspect, 60% of the Melbourne ward is conservation land, including Arthur's Pass National Park. With respect to the community board feedback, our research showed that behaviour is changing and 70% of respondents would contact their councillor ahead of their community board member. One of the comments we made was, while a community board has been a traditional way to represent rural communities, technology is changing, allowing greater accessibility, especially post-COVID. And this extends to the workload argument, where as a council, we have increased and changing access to council services without needing to go through an elected member to get things resolved. The rural representation and geographical arguments were problematic with the way the subdivisions are managed within the community board, with more urban and more densely populated areas still getting more representation and more representatives. There was also the thought that this doesn't benefit the wider district, and most submissions were received from one of the district's largest townships, which is Darfield. For the naming considerations, advice was taken from local government commission, local NZ Commission guidelines and the New Zealand Geographic Board, and advice was also sought from local Runaka. The Te Rotaki Te Kakarua, which is our bicultural strategy here at Selwyn, allows for decisions to be made to support the strategy. And in particular, there is a requirement for council to act with mana and integrity in navigating biculturalism.
Thank you. So really, I'm just going to flesh out a little bit more of what Sarah has already covered. So the initial proposal and the staff recommendations was for the council to resolve to accept the initial proposal to move from 10 councillors to 8 and adjust the ward boundaries as described in the initial proposal. Felt that the initial proposal fulfills the requirements of the communities of interests as set out by the Electoral Act for 2001. The community board, the council resolves to remove the community boards, which would mean disestablishing the Malvern Community Board. And whilst acknowledging that there had been some feedback, particularly around that rural-urban split, it was certainly felt that it was not an achievable workload for councillors and was unlikely to impact negatively in the ratepayers' ability to have their views expressed. And we heard earlier that the community would more often than not reach out to their councillor in the first instance rather than the Malvern Community Board. And there was also an opportunity around reducing costs to the community through the targeted rate that the community currently pay for to have the community board in place. Council's resolve to work with Residents and Communities Association. So council looked at whether there was an opportunity to have a different model in terms of if community boards were not to exist, and that was about how we could engage closer to our communities, and that was engaging with the number of residents association and community groups, and wishing to design a model that would bring councillors and staff even closer to the community through a different kind of model and relationship, which would make sure that we were getting information from the grassroots level back into council. And that was one of the options and models that we considered with the removal of a community board. And as Sarah and Sam have alluded to before, item 4, the ward names. So Selwyn District Council prioritises inclusivity and cultural respect in our community. And this is the work that's described in our bicultural strategy. And Council's committed to working with the local Runaka and Mana Whenua to engage, inform and educate for bicultural practice and understanding in our community. And for Council and for Selwyn in particular, has a long history of partnership. And it's really important that we conduct ourselves with manner and integrity, which sometimes means having to navigate through confronting issues, including difference of opinion regarding biculturalism and racism. Selwyn Council considers recognising Māori language as not only appropriate, but also necessary. It does reflect our commitment to working in a partnership with Mana Whenua and our shared responsibility to create a more equitable and respectful society.
Sharon, so this map is a zoomed in piece. There's a lot of Melbourne that's missing off the top of this map, but just so you could see the detail around the final decision that council decided on. This wasn't in what staff proposed, and it didn't follow the recommendations as outlined previously. This brought back one of the maps that was previously discussed by the Representation Review Committee. Probably coming back to your question, Chair Duffy, there was a lot of conversation about that rural representation and finding a way that both Melbourne and Ellesmere could have 2 councillors rather than 1 councillor. And I'll just read some of the comments made during the meeting so that you can get a sort of sense of the flavour of the conversation and decision making around this. That was probably the key driver for the decision. But as you can see, some of the other comments from members of the council who had been part of the subcommittee saw that it didn't deal with any of the info we'd gathered about West Melton's situation and left them in a position they didn't want to be in. And the same with Burnham as far as connection, and West Rolleston, sorry, as connection to Rolleston.
So Nancy, what we might do, I'm just watching the clock a little bit, so just for a moment. So we might bring that commentary back maybe in the right of reply space, because I just need to give a signal to the appellants who are no doubt sitting observing. We're going way over time and against the schedule. So, and I'm not pushing you to go any quicker, But in terms of any other commentary relating to what I asked, I think we should hold that over and just give a signal to the appellants that the way we're going, we're going to be a good half an hour beyond where we originally intended in terms of the schedule.
We'll be finished within 10 minutes. It might be 5 if we rattle through, and we're happy to come back to your questions in the right of reply.
Thank you.
So you can see the names of the wards in that previous slide as well. This slide really shows you the extent of the wards and where they cover. And there's a lot of detail in those small graphs. Sorry, but it was trying to show the boundaries and where they sit. So the proposal and the decision by councillors was to maintain the status quo with current ward boundaries and maintain the 4 wards. To increase the number of elected members from 10 to 11. That meant that both Melvin and Ellesmere could keep 2 councillors and Ralston would gain a councillor. It would maintain the Melvin Community Board, it was council's decision, and adopt the names Karmania, Ralston, Kapuna Springs, Tawera, Melvin, and Te Wahora, Ellesmere. And in the naming of Tawera, Melvin, it was also noted that Tawera was already a name of a subdivision of the Melvin Community Board, but because that decision was made so close to the end of the timeframes, we didn't have time to consult with Runaka about the right names for the Melvin Community Board, so that we acknowledge that we need to be clear with our communications about the use of those names. The next slide shows around the communities of interest, and we moved, at the moment, our current model has Ralston Ward 23% representation above, and it has Ellesmere 17% representation below, whereas moving to this new model, we now have Ralston at 1.5% up, and Ellesmere still negative 9.1%, but inside the 10%, which was a focus for the councillors during that discussion. Next slide, the final proposal. This is for the community board, gives you an outline of where the community board subdivisions sit. There's no boundary changes, and the plus or minus 10% rule being followed. The final proposal rationale, so it addresses the population growth across the district at the time of the decision, and that was one of the pieces of commentary that again councillors raised, because we knew that it's not even at the time of the decision, it's at the time of the stats numbers, which are already 12 months old, and like I said, we're more than 5,000 people out as of today for those decisions. It responded to the community feedback around the consultation, requesting greater representation to reflect the region and our district's growth, and it ensures the rural representation for Melvin communities and recognises the large geographic area within the ward to maintain the Melvin Community Board. Within the deliberations, there's a few comments that I just want to give you a flavour of the conversation. So the analysis, this is from our minutes, which you can find online. The analysis showed that the communities of interest were identified as being correct by staff in the initial proposal, and but acknowledging that there were concerns about rural representation. Although adding an additional councillor to Rolleston Ward presented a simple fix, it didn't appear to be consistent with communities of interest within the district. The ward boundaries are retained with 1 extra councillor for Rolleston Ward, and the Melvin and Community Board were maintained, and people wanted to have the te reo included. We had a councillor that wanted to reinforce to us that it wasn't a council decision, but was a decision for communities, which highlighted, I guess, the influence of hearings and the voice that we heard during that hearing process. And as Sarah spoke to earlier, there was a lot of rural feedback from the 2 more rural wards, but a lot of that actually came from the towns within those rural wards, not necessarily the rural landscape. West Melton had clearly noted during pre-consultation that the research that it didn't feel part of Melvin and was more connected to Ralston. There was conversation about Melvin being such a large geographic area, but others brought up that actually 60% of Melvin is dockland. It's alpine land with no one living on it, so the ability to represent the people is distorted when you only look at a map of the area, not the places and the geography. And I think the schools zoning map shows quite clearly where the majority of people live. We had councillors saying that other councils have made different decisions and that Selwyn shouldn't rely on the Local Government Commission, and that we should think about keeping to the status quo as an option. We had councillors say that it was good to see the community so motivated, but it seemed to be biased towards one area of the district. This is another set of data, that we have another set of data that shows something different. And I guess that was trying to balance the pre-consultation data with the hearings data, which there were some different views coming through in those. I had a councillor talk about, as it stands, 50% of the representation in Melbourne would be lost if we'd gone with the previous, with the staff recommendation. And another councillor talked about having 2 councillors made it easier to discuss community issues, and there were several committees to attend. A couple more comments. There was councillors talking about people in Melbourne seem to demand having a councillor to talk to rather than using other options as other wards might. There was some sentiment, while it said whilst it's important, the sentiment, this councillor didn't want it to sway their decision on the day. Council and experts had done a whole lot of work and they're comfortable with the recommendations as put before us. And we also, someone else said that council represent people, not a parcel of land. And so the size of the geography isn't necessarily part of the decision making. It's the people and the communities of interest that are important. We also, through that discussion, included community boards, and the recommendation was to include them back in with a number of people reflecting the submission and comments that had been brought to us. And I mentioned before about the Tawera clash. That brings me to the end of our presentation. I think we've covered most of the work. Brendan, if I haven't come back to you on that particular question, if you'd like to clarify any other questions that the commissioners have while we listen and take a break, we'll be able to come back to you with them. But we'll stay in here to listen to the appellants to understand their points of view and be able to respond to any questions you might have. Thank you.
Okay, just let me cogitate for a moment. So, Emma, can we, with the appellant, can we just make sure they're comfortable? You'll be talking offline, no doubt, because I'm really keen. To be frank, we need to ask some questions now before we take a break. Otherwise, we're just going to lose the flow. And so I'm going to give a signal that it'll probably be 11 o'clock before we get to the appellants. So if you can just sort that bit out. Right now, I'm keen to go by the fellow commissioners. Sorry, guys, I need to get the screen going. Just bear with me. Right, that's better. I just need to check in with fellow commissioners regarding, and you'll have some questions, I'm sure. But Mayor Sam, going back specifically to where I interrupted in the slide pack, it will be useful in the writer reply to understand as clearly as possible why it is that you went out with the proposition of reducing down to 8. And the background to the question is, when we did the review 3 years ago, we made the observation, the commission made the observation that significantly growing community, surely not a greater number, but surely a number higher than 8 would be appropriate for consideration. You've gone out with 8, and I made that observation there in the slide pack where in the initial commentary there, people made the comment about wanting a higher level of engagement. So I'm just really struggling with that and why you got to that point. I'll just fire some other questions in as well that we'd be keen to understand. Why is it that 80% don't feel represented with the current number of elected representatives, and then you're going to go down to 8, which would be even harder in some people's minds. So again, we're trying to get clarity around that. And why is it that 70% don't like the ward structure. What is it that they don't like about the ward structure? How come 70% of the community has commentary in that space? And also the commentary about, where is it? Councillor, people go to the councillor, not, now this is not easy for you to answer, I don't think, but I'm signaling as I'd like to get more clarity. Why does the community go to the councillor and not the community board? So I think obviously we'll have that discussion with the what am I talking about, with John, whom he comes on from the Melbourne Community Board. So and also for clarity, I think in a public hearing such as this, there's comment about the cost of a community board. It'd be useful to know, what does the community board cost? As a statement of fact, I'm not questioning it, but I think it's important that that's made known. And the last thing for me is that if you were going to establish resident and community associations, how might they be determined? Are they, names out of a hat? Are they elected? Are they appointed? Now, what's the protocols around that, should that be a path that you wanted to follow? So there's a bunch of questions there that can come back in the right of reply, I think, but I just need to check in with fellow commissioners because there may be some, I'm sure there'll be others. So who's going to go first? Commissioner Bull? And just unmute Commissioner Bull.
Better?
Yep,
Yeah.
thank you.
Just following on from your comments, I'm really interested as to why the move to 8 councillors in view of the growth that's happening there. So just following on from that from you, and also the residential groups rather than community boards, and how many were there or are there, and how often would you see consultation with them? Why was West Melton returned to the Tauriwa Melbourne ward in the council's final proposal also?
Right.
And I think you've covered everything else, so that's fine for me. Thank you.
Thank you. And then moving over to Commissioner Bigham.
Just to clarify, the final proposal is moving to 11 elected members, not 8, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Mayor Sam and team. Very comprehensive outline of the process, the feedback, the rationale. But what's missing for me in the rationale is the total 360 swing from the sidelining of current representation being viewed as not adequately doing its job and representing your communities of interest, etc., was sidelined as the initial proposal, but in the final proposal, it's come back full circle. And I'm struggling to understand how the community had the opportunity to adequately comment or reflect on that if that's not what was put out to them for consultation. How did that happen? How did it come back to that full circle swing? That's really the crux of my question.
Okay. So we'll keep that for right of reply as well, I think, Mayor Sam. Rightio. So for the moment, we've heard a significantly detailed summary of the process that you went through, and thank you for that. And the slide pack has helped. I think commissioners have given a bit of a sense around, give us those points of clarity. I think we deserve a break for everybody's sake. Now, I did say earlier on that I thought it might be 11 o'clock before we kick off, but I reckon we can do better than that. So a 10-minute break and reconvene at 10:45. Does that feel okay? Rightio. So let's agree that we'll take a 10-minute break and we'll reconvene at 10:45. Just turn your mics off and your screens and don't delete yourselves, and we'll come back. Cheers. Thanks, Emma.
96 from.
So Emma, we're back live, aren't we? Yeah, thank you. So we're just waiting for Commissioner Bull. Here she is, fantastic. So we've got a full muster. Look, Mayor Sam, I've just got a couple more. Well, I've got a question, I suppose, at the end of an observation for the right of reply. How am I going to say this? 70% of the community, it was noted, made the observation about their dissatisfaction with representation. And the final proposal is pretty much status quo, save for an additional councillor. So in the right of reply, it will be very useful to try and get an understanding about the justification, given that stat that you gave us. And in addition, I think it'd be useful, it would be important to understand what level of exploration went in to a mixed model, an at-large option, because I'm not clear enough about how deeply that was explored or not, given all those observations that have been made today, massive population growth, a large isolated rural area, the urban structures are getting so much more integrated. So having ward options with an at-large option was that considered. And my final observation, my final question is, and again it comes back in the right of reply, how comfortable, not you, but council, how comfortable is council that you have future-proofed the representation that you think's right for the next 6 years? Given what we looked at 3 years ago, given what you've looked at now, how future-proofed and level of comfort is there? So I'll just leave them sitting there to come through in the right of reply. And we will take a break for, don't worry, we'll hear from appellants now, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll come back to hear that commentary. So with that, we'll now move through to the Rolleston Residents Association, to Mark, and I do apologise for the delay. Checking time, but we're here now. So Emma, you'll bring Mark in. Kia ora, Mark.
Kia ora.
Nice to see you, and once again, apologies for the delay. Process is process, and we better to be pure and open, and so that's what we've done. But in terms of your observations, you're very welcome to give us a summary. Obviously, commissioners have got your submission here. I'm just rapidly trying to bring it up on my iPad. Here it is, and so I'm ready to go when you are.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Mark Alexander toka ingoa, ko Aote Manakura o Te Panga o Noho o Rolleston. Hello, I'm Mark Alexander. I'm chair of the Rolleston Residents Association. I've been an association member for 30 years. I was a community board member for 9 years and a Selwyn District Councillor for 12 years. We don't have the IT and administrative support that council does, so I've supplied a background document to you, and I'm reading this statement, which I can also supply. I hope the commission members will be as generous with time for us as they were to council, though it won't take nearly as long. I have been authorised to speak on the association's behalf. I'm representing the association's views, not my own. The association submitted on Selwyn Council's preliminary representation review proposals, the initial representation review proposal, and has appealed the council's final proposal. The council's appeal focuses on 5 points. Council's final proposal was not part of either the preliminary proposal nor part of the Council's initial representation review proposal. No one, the association and its members, and the wider community had an opportunity to submit on, comment on, endorse or oppose the final proposal. How is this democratic? It came out of the blue to the community. It was a proposal that Council itself had rejected early on in the process. Council's final proposal splits Ralston over 2 wards, splitting a community of interest. Council has disingenuously created a fictional West Ralston community to justify this. West Ralston Primary School is named because of its geographic location on the western side of Ralston, not its membership of an imaginary West Ralston community. West Ralston School wants to be within the Ralston ward, and I've supplied a letter of support that they offered without prompting to the Ralston Residents Association. Similarly, I've seen in the background material, there is a map of the Ralston Residents Association's rohi. Members of the association who live to the west and northwest of Ralston associate themselves with Ralston, not Ellesmere, and should be considered part of the Ralston community of interest. This was a mistake at the last representation review, and the mistake continues. We were actually pleased to see in the Council's initial proposal that that was going to be remedied. However, in the final proposal, it has not been. Number of councillors. Selwyn actually has too many councillors compared to many other councils in New Zealand. A smaller number of councillors would not reduce residents' access to elected representatives. A small number of councillors would improve council's governance. Increasing the number will not improve council's governance. Community calls for more councillors indicate a misunderstanding of representation rather than the need for more councillors. There is no need nor any work for a 4th councillor in the Ralston ward. The community needs and wants quality representation, not quantity. Future-proofing the model. The 4-ward out 8 councillor model or 3-ward out 8 councillor model is actually a better structure, considering Selwyn's continued growth. If you look at the figures in our appeal, the Ralston ward in the enlarged ward has a smaller percentage. It's actually better set for growth than Council's final proposal. So the models Council proposed are better than the one Council's adopted. The association supports the disestablishment of the Malvern Community Board. The board has been dysfunctional as it does not undertake anything that community residents groups and councillors could themselves do. Staff support of the board takes them away from supporting the council and district. It's actually hard to identify any successes of the Malvern Community Board in the current term for their community that communities couldn't themselves have done. And as you heard earlier, Council's own research showed that community does not support the Malvern Community Board. They'd rather go direct to councillors. It's an impediment for democracy rather than a benefit. Your question earlier about community associations, they already exist in Selwyn. Some of them used to be Selwyn subcommittees of council. Selwyn has been through a process where they are now have been changed. They are independent associations shifting to be incorporated societies. The Ralston Residents Association has been an incorporated society since the early 70s. We predate the Selwyn District Council. The association seeks that the Selwyn District Council's final proposal be set aside and that either representation review and the council's initial representation proposal in July be adopted, the 4-ward 8 councillor or 3-ward 8 councillor structure be adopted, not the final proposal. Ngā mihi nui. Thank you.
Cheers, Mark. Thanks for those observations. Just out of pure and utter curiosity, what's the size of your association and how's it structured? How do you get on it all?
As I said in our background document, we're open to all residents within our area. We normally have a small number to each meeting, but we actually we're members of the community. We try to seek their views and represent them. We're open to any person who owns a property and pays rates, or is a resident within our area that I showed in the background document. Funnily enough, is based on the old Ralston Reserve rating area, because that was a known boundary. Those people paid into a targeted rate for the Ralston Reserve, so they associated themselves with the Ralston Township. That structure has been abolished because council went some years ago to a district-wide reserve rate. But it's still the associations, right? It's still where we believe people have an association with Ralston.
Okay, thank you. You made the comment about the Melville, Community Board being dysfunctional and an impediment to democracy. They're pretty strong statements. Can you quantify that?
Yes. If you look at them this term, they imploded. The chair and another member resigned. They had to have a by-election, which didn't have a lot of votes, wasn't well supported by the community. As a former councillor, a former community board member, and now a resident association chair, I don't see anything that the community committees in Melbourne couldn't have achieved by working with their councillor that the community board has done for them. The community board, if it was working properly, can do an awful lot for a community. They're not restricted by the few delegations Selwyn gives them. They can do a lot. As long as they are working within the interest of the community, they have a right to do anything they pretty much want. When I was a community board member, we submitted on Selwyn's long-term plan, ECAN's long-term plan, and in fact, we submitted on acts of parliament where they affected our community. The Melbourne Community Board has shown none of this grasping the opportunity to represent the community. If you read their minutes, you'll find very little in there that they're actually working for their community. It's mainly just administration of the board, adding no value to the community at all. As the staff research said, community members would rather go to their councillor than the board. That speaks volumes.
Okay, might be useful, Mayor Salmon, write a reply to give a perspective as to council's justification for the continued support. It'd be useful to understand. So what are we looking for? What do they do? What sort of delegations do they have? And how is it that, and how is council seeing them adding value for the next duration? That'll be useful to in your right of reply. I'm just going to check in with fellow commissioners. Commissioner Bigham.
Kia ora, Mark. Thank you for your very passionate submission today and your past service to your district and to your communities. Thank you for that. Just interested in picking up on your theme around needing better people standing for council, not necessarily more people standing for council. How, as you well know, and we well know, that really just depends on the luck of the draw as to who stands for council in any given election. So how might going down to 8 ensure that there are better
candidates?
Yeah, there are better candidates. How do you do that? How can you guarantee that you're going to get better candidates when you've got no control over who decides to stand?
You can't. There's an elephant in the room that is not allowed to be discussed, which is how councillors are paid. If you have 11 councillors, the pie is sliced into 11 slices. If you have 8 councillors, the same pie is sliced into 8 slices. The common complaint about Selwyn is that councillors are not paid enough to make people treat it as a full-time job. It has increased. When I started as a councillor, we were paid a pittance. You did it as a community vocation rather than a job. and that's perhaps how it should be. But fewer councillors, and you're not supposed to consider this, but it means councillors get paid more. If councillors get paid more people, more talented people can look at it as something I can do. If they're paid less, as they will be with 11, then that actually says to someone who's got to support a family, can I do this and maintain a job and live a life? The answer often is no. So you end up with more people like me, grey-haired, retired, self-employed. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with grey hair. It's a sign of that we've lasted this long. But you don't end up with the diversity of representation that perhaps that you could if they were paid less. And if they were paid less and didn't have to try to hold down, paid more, didn't have to try to hold down another job as well, they can actually be in the community, hearing from the community, which is their job. I don't believe that a single councillor in the Malvern or Ellesmere wards, or a combined Ellesmere-Malvern ward having 2 councillors, is less representation. My experience as a Selwyn District councillor is that I got phone calls from Ellesmere, and I was in the Selwyn Central, which was West Melton and Ralston ward. I got phone calls from across the district because I made myself visible to the community. I was out there. I went to meetings in Malvern and Ellesmere. I was visible, and people would phone me, even though I wasn't the ward councillor, because they believed that I could be effective for them, and I believe I was. So I'm saying that the fear that one councillor in the Malvern ward means they get less representation is in fact wrong. To be honest, there was a bit of stirring up of the current elected representatives, feathering their own nests, stirring that pot, telling the community that those horrible councillors from the east will not represent you. That's actually wrong. Their job is to represent the whole district, not the ward in which you were elected.
Yep, that's the
If they don't understand that, then they need to be told that and get out and do their jobs. And if they do their jobs, they represent the whole district. Selwyn has grown, but actually it doesn't need the bulk of the elected members. It needs effective elected members, not more members.
Right. So from your perspective, Mark, you think 11 is over-governance?
Yes.
Okay. Even moving into the future with the projected growth?
Part of the reason that the community will say they don't feel confident in council is actually it's the council's communication with the community. Last year we had a 15% rate rise. This year it's forecast to be 14%. Council decided not to have an annual plan. Submit consultation because it doesn't have to. The community feels ignored. That's why they're dissatisfied. It's nothing to do with the number of elected representatives. It's council ignoring them. And they're feeling that they don't get heard by council. Increasing the number of councillors isn't going to help that process. Councillors need to be engaged with their community, not more of them.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And if I may, Mr. Chair, just one more question, following in from one of your questions. Mark, how does the Ralston Resident Association currently feed into council processes? You've submitted here, obviously. How else does your association and the other associations you've mentioned involve themselves in the current council?
We have a good relationship, except at the moment seem to be submitting against council all the time. We have at least one ward councillor come to our meetings, our monthly meetings. Often we have 2 or 3. We have a good relationship with staff. Our meeting next week has 3 council staff coming to present to us on infrastructure issues. So we actually have a good relationship and an open communication with council. We've submitted on local alcohol applications. Tomorrow I'm speaking to council on another issue at a hearing. We participate with council. We have a good relationship with council. Though we may choose to disagree, it doesn't stop us being effective.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mark, for your time.
Just going again to you, Mayor Sam, for right of reply, the observations that Mark made here, and I'll read it out The Rolleston and Selwyn communities not had an opportunity to consider and consult on council's final proposal. It was never presented to the community for consideration. The community's not had any opportunity to support or oppose this proposal. It will be useful in right of reply to give a perspective on that. Give your perspective on that, please. Thank you. Commissioner Ball, are you okay? What is it called? Unmute.
Done.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for your submission. But currently, you say there are too many councillors, but in view of the fact of the projected growth in the area, would you not think that there was room for an extra commissioner in anticipation of that growth?
No. As I said, it's quality, not quantity. It's effective engagement with the community. Rolleston, because of its growth, if you understand the community, a lot of the community are new to Selwyn. To build and pay for a new home in Rolleston, Lincoln, Prebbleton, West Melton, you need at least 1.5 incomes, if not 2 incomes. If you have a family, and we're overrepresented in young families, you've got a mother and father working at least 1.5 jobs, if not 2 jobs. By the time you come home, you've done school stuff with kids and sports stuff with kids. You don't actually have a lot of time for engagement. You don't have a lot of energy for engagement. I don't believe that having an extra councillor will actually increase that engagement. Our current ward councillors, Phil, Sophie and Nicole, are engaged with the community. You see them out, they've got kids in sport, kids at school. You see them in the community. They're engaged. I don't believe another councillor will actually increase that at all. And even with Rolleston, it's currently about 32,000, that's one councillor for about 10,000. That's not overly much compared to a lot of other places. And Selwyn has changed from when it was created, it was a rural district with a few townships. It's now an urban district with a rural rump. Some of our older rural communities are struggling with that. The comment that council said was in council's presentation about why does Rolleston get everything? It's because Rolleston has 40% of Selwyn's population.
Right.
When it gets everything, it is building facilities not just for Rolleston, it is building facilities for the whole district. So it's not, Rolleston is picked on because it said, why do we get this stuff? Well, actually, Rolleston economically subsidises the rest of the district. I don't believe, and the Resident Association doesn't believe, that another Rolleston ward councillor will lead to any more effective representation for Rolleston or the district.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Just one further, Mr. Chair, please.
Sure.
You talked about community associations. How much communication is there with community associations at present?
Between council and community associations?
Yes.
Well, I can only speak for my association.
Yes.
As I said, we have a council, at least one councillor comes to our monthly meetings. We engage in a lot of email discussions with our councillors. If I've got a question, I can send it direct to council staff and I'll CC in the ward councillors. We have a good communication. They're engaged with us. So, it's hard to answer that anymore. That we have, whether that's because we've had a number of ward councillors continue to be involved with the association or not, I'm not sure. But we've had a good relationship with council in terms of that engagement. Not always agreeing, but at least we're engaged, and we choose to be engaged.
Thank you. The council made the comment that community associations would be better than, say, community boards. So I just was interested to know how much consultation there does go on between community associations and council.
We get emailed, regular emails from the association, which are shared with members, from the council, which are shared with members. There could be more formal consultation, but the associations exist. It sounded like council was talking about more formalising it more than it currently does. That's would be nice. We're currently supported. We get a grant which covers our room hire at a community centre for the year. So that's very appreciated and very helpful. Could they fund more? Possibly, but ratepayers would have to pay for it. So yeah, I think when communities choose to engage with council, council engages with them, and it's really up to the community association and that association and council working on that relationship. It's there. It can, is how I personally find it good. The association finds it good. I can't speak for other associations.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Mark, for taking the time to come and present to us today. Thank you.
Kia ora.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for those. Thanks for your effort and energy, and we'll look forward to the writer reply to get some extra points of clarity. So I appreciate your time.
Do you need my statement that I read from today, or have you got it on record on the recording?
Emma, we've got it on record, haven't we? Yeah, we've got it.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'm really keen that we move to the next presenter from the Melbourne Community Board. Now, this is an invitation by us. So the Commission have invited, and John Berry's going to be here, as I understand it. So we've invited the Melbourne Community Board just to give us a perspective. We're not going to drill them or go down to too much detail, but as a courtesy, we've done it on a number of other hearings as well, where there's been some commentary about a particular community board. We've asked them to come in and give us a perspective, because I think that just helps with the balance. So I'm sure momentarily John will come on. Kia ora, John. Just have to unmute you. There we go.
Kia ora koutou katoa.
Now, you've been observing some of the proceedings. Fantastic. So look, as I said, we're inviting you along to give us a perspective. You're not a submitter, but as a courtesy, the Commission felt it was important to get some observations from you about the process that's taken place and any perspectives that you might have on behalf of the Melbourne Community Board. So I'm passing back to you.
Thank you. And on behalf of the board, the opportunity to be involved is greatly appreciated. I wish to pass on an apology from the chair, who would normally be in this place, who's had far more ongoing involvement. Just as a bit of background, I'm a newbie to the district and a newbie to local government politics. In July 23, having been press ganged into accepting a nomination and then, much to my astonishment, being elected. So I've really only been on the Melbourne Community Board since towards the end of 2023. And I don't think there's any disagreement that, yes, from time to time, organisations do implode. And my perspective on that, remember, I'm speaking on behalf of the board and from reasonably extensive community engagement within Melbourne, that the working party that Nick Smith is chairing for Local Government New Zealand is grappling with the low turnout. And I think one of the issues is when any elected position has X number of vacancies and only X number of candidates, and there is no election, then logically the people don't get a say as to who you get elected. And the reality of life is we have to work with what we've got. So moving forward, Melbourne Community Board, I believe, is working effectively. And there are about 14 residents' associations in Melbourne, and the board has split those up. So more often than not, a member of the board goes to most of the monthly meetings of the residents' community associations, and some residents' associations are more active than not. For example, I know of several that have requested and the chief executive has obliged and had council staff go along and present. There's been an occasion in relation to earlier matters of water, not local water done well, where the Melbourne Community Board and the Darfield Residents Association arranged a community forum, and that was well attended. There were a panel of experts speaking there. The board has also formed relationships with community residents associations outside of the Melbourne district, and I believe that they are working well. The issue I see in the argument that the council can work with residents' community associations, that in Melbourne, as I said, there are 14, and also the community board, as you're well aware, has a statutory role under the Local Government Act, which the community associations don't. And then moving on to the high level of dissatisfaction expressed by the community in relation to the Selwyn District Council, I believe that Mark was reasonably on the nail when he said there is a tendency that the council may at times not listen. And I know it's easy to sit on the outside. And as I said, I'm new to local involvement in local politics. So I really don't have the experience that the rest of the commissioners have. But in my view, being relevant, the preliminary consultation on the representation review was a classic example. And I believe the chief executive alluded to the fact that in the preliminary consultation, there were X number of people whose submissions were duly considered, and that was mentioned by the communications manager. And then there was another large group of about 300 who the Melbourne Community Board, the Darfield Residents Association and the Kirwi Residents Association, because there was only online submissions, arranged to get out and meet the people, get them to fill in forms providing their name and address and contact details so that the information could be verified. And it's my belief and the belief of the large number of people who were involved in submitting on that the council, whilst they acknowledged receipt of them, failed to give due and adequate consideration. Had they given due and adequate consideration, in my humble opinion, at the preliminary stage, the question would have been changed and a far more positive result obtained in the final consultation. So in summary, I believe the community board is now working effectively, and we are submitting on a range of issues, including the Environment Canterbury public transport and other matters. And then changing tack again, to the question that you raised, if I may be bold enough, sir, in relation to what does it cost for the Melbourne Community Board? This is a contentious issue that at the moment there's a targeted rate of $25, and these are figures off the top of my head because, as I said, I've stood in this role and wasn't as fully briefed as I should be, and that generates round about $180,000 a year. From that $180,000, $60,000 is taken for remuneration of board members, which we have no say in. And then currently, the council takes around $100,000 of the $180,000 raised as a service charge for servicing the Melbourne Community Board. I am not doubting that the council is entitled to take a service charge. What I believe, and it's supported through our community engagement, is that $100,000 is not value for money. The board is currently considering a proposed budget from the 1st of July 25 financial year, whereby the targeted rate of $25, $26 would bring in $180,000. 60,000 to board members' remuneration, and a suggested yet to be agreed, and we need to negotiate strongly with the council, 60,000 for the service charge to the council seems fair and equitable, and that would leave 60,000 approximately, if my mathematics is correctly, for the board to do its operations under the relevant section of the Local Government Act. And we believe that we do provide value for money. I'm just getting my thoughts now because I've gone off track from my prepared speech, I'm sorry. As regard to the number of councillors, I'm not too sure that the research evidence would show that having less councillors equates to better quality councillors. I think it's a spurious relationship, and it sounds good, but given the fact that it would be around about $7,500 increase, I'm not too sure that that's sufficient to achieve the aims espoused by the chair of the Rolleston Residents Association in getting exceptionally good candidates stand. And I'm sure that the Working Party by the Honourable Nick Smith will come up with hopefully some solutions, because it's a little bit spurious to say that just because there's a low voter turnout means that the community board is dysfunctional. So I think I can probably just round that off by saying that I don't believe there's a sufficient hard evidence to show that the board is dysfunctional. I accept the board did implode, but that's life and we move on. As for the surveys, what depends on the survey design is questions if they're not, and I'm not criticising any one person, I'm just trying to share my view and the view of a considerable number of the constituents that I and my fellow board members have spoken to, that the question in the extensive surveying and research the council undertook prior to going out for a preliminary consultation, who do you go to as your point of contact when you want something done with the council? That's my interpretation. Well, naturally, I would suggest that 90% of people would say councillors, because we live in a hierarchical world. And the community board has a role, but the community board's role, as defined by statute, is nowhere near that of a councillor. The community board has far more of a community focus, as I'm sure the panel of commissioners and staff at the council are well aware. So ask the question, who is your first point of contact, or who is your preferred point of contact? I'm putting it to you that it's tautological that it would be a councillor, because I would answer council, not community board, but I do believe that doesn't diminish the value that the community in Melbourne, which they demonstrated by having 81.7% of the submitters in the final submission proposal saying, we want the Melbourne Community Board. So I think it's self-evident that the Melbourne Community Board within the Melbourne ward is wanted. And as I said, discussions that we've had and the work we're doing with several community residents associations outside the Melbourne ward supports that. So I don't really want to get into a more detail. I think that's an overview, and yep. Sir, I'm happy to take any questions and I'll do my best to answer them.
Well, thank you very much, John, and certainly make the acknowledgement that you've been put in the hot seat. But to be fair, the observations that you've made have been well considered and appreciated. So job well done there. Welcome to the world of local government. It's a very intriguing world. So better not saying more in that space. Specific, just as you've been articulating your views, I've got a question to go back to Mayor Sam for right of reply, and it's around in the initial proposal, what consideration, why might it have been considered that a single representative in a ward was the right idea, was going to add the value that you're looking for, yet in the final proposal we've gone to where we've landed. So just help us to understand, if you can understand that. And also going back to the observations that that John's just made, I'm not so much worried about the targeted rate and how that's broken down in terms of dollars. I completely understand all of that. What I'm more interested in is what delegations are made available to the community board in terms of probably useful to say in terms of value. So I just don't know what they are at the minute. So that might help. I clearly understand that revenue is used for staff and obviously paying the community board, but it'll be interesting to know what the other delegations are, just because we're in a pure and public process. Commissioners, Commissioner Bigham, no. Commissioner Bull, no. Just off mute, Commissioner Bull.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just one quick one, John. Thank you very much for your submission. You made the comment that your preferred contact to council would be through a councillor rather than community board. So why not increase the number of councillors?
I would agree. And the board's position is that the number of councillors at 11 is far preferable to reducing it to 8.
Thank you.
I suppose that the board works very cooperatively with the 2 councillors in the Melbourne ward, and we acknowledge and respect that we do have different roles, and I think the feeling in the Melbourne community is shown by the 81.7% submitting that wanted the retention or not the abolition of the Melbourne Community Board, and 2 councillors, shows that admittedly there may be a dock estate which is very few residents for a large part of the area, but it's also a fairly tortuous and 2 and a bit hour drive to get to Arthur's Pass and other parts of the area.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I think, just bear with me for 30 seconds. Oh, actually, I've got it. And I should have mentioned it. You made the observation that there are 14 resident associations, which I have to say I was quite stunned with, and you are engaging and you engage with them. Why do you go outside you mentioned about going beyond the boundary into other resident associations? What's the science behind that?
Right. From my understanding, it started at the representation reviews that my impression, and I won't speak for the board on this, was that throughout the whole district there was a dissatisfaction about the way the council handled the initial stages of the representation review, and the chair is a long-standing and far more experienced person in the political realm than the relative newcomer that I am, and he has well-established contacts within the district. And there were, from my understanding, communications between him and the chairs of several other residents' associations. And the chair and I were invited to several meetings to discuss the representation review. And after that, the seeds were sown, and some of the seedlings are progressing well.
That suggests the community board area should be larger.
I don't think so, but I do think it suggests that maybe other wards, and I think I can probably exclude Rolleston because I don't like speaking on behalf of other people, but I can say that there is at least one other, maybe two wards where there have been some tentative discussions about, well, you're lucky having a community board. How would it work in our ward? And that's where the involvement with the other ward residents groups has sort of taken the most traction, I suppose, sir.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you for those observations, and look, and thank you again. Thank
Can
you
I
again
make
for
one
being
more,
available.
please?
Sorry.
Can I just make one final one about the communications? I think it's a matter of record that modern communications, for example, the internet, is not what it should be in the Malvern ward and maybe other parts of Ellesmere. And I think it's disingenuous to sort of put it through that we can have Zoom meetings and teleconferences, because if we're trying to do that, which we do when the board meets every 2 months with the representatives of the committees of the residents associations in Melbourne, and at times the ones that are further away drop out, and the quality isn't good. So on that, I'll finish my submission and thank you for the opportunity to present.
Brilliant, John. Thank you very, very much. Appreciate it. Okay, so we've had a pretty good go at this, I think, and out of respect, we should give some time for, just help me, Mayor Sam. Do you need some space before right of reply?
You have 15 minutes. That would we've been listening to everything and taking it on board, haven't had a chance to consider the questions to come back to you properly. So if we could have 15 minutes, that would just allow us that space.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just want to be sure that we allow sufficient time before we break. So just checking very quickly with commissioners. You're all done? You're all happy to go? Rightio. Okay. Rightio. So let's agree it's 11:33. So we'll come back at what, 11:50?
10:02. 10:02 would be good. Yep.
Okay, so we'll adjourn and come back at 10:02. Usual protocol, we'll turn our audio and videos off, but we'll still stay live. Is it? And we're in your hands, Emma. Brilliant. Thanks, everybody. Okay, we're nearly there. So just here we go. So I think we're all back now, Emma. We've got everybody on screen. We're all good to go. So look, we'll now pass back to you, Mayor Sam, and team for right of reply. There might be a couple of little questions, don't know. We'll just see where we land. But now we're in your hands.
Okay, well, thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you to the two speakers, Mark and Community Board member John, for their comments on the process. We'll take a bit of a group approach to answering some of your questions. We thank you for sending them through to us, but there might be some other clarity that we can provide through commentary rather than just addressing the questions directly. To start off with, though, you asked us about reducing down to 8 councillors from our current 10 in the proposal, given the preliminary engagement comments wanted higher levels of elected members. Well, the feedback that we had from the community was around access and wanting to be and meet with councillors and council decision making. And I think Mark talked to this in his submission to you. And what I see around our council table is we have on many decisions, we have a lot of conversation that's led by 3 or 4 people. And once we get past, the 5th person speaking, there's a lot of agreement with one of the other speakers that has been here. So the diversity of view that we get isn't necessarily because we've got 10 councillors plus a Mana Whenua representative plus myself sitting around that table. And in the conversation with the Representation Review Subcommittee, there was the chance to discuss if we could attract more people to stand for council, because their pay was going to be, instead of in the 50s, it would be in the 70s. That would mean more people in our community could see this as a job for them, where they would be able to balance the other things in their life with standing and representing their community. And that might provide us with a wider variety of voice. I totally agree with the comments made by others that it doesn't guarantee that. It certainly doesn't set that up, and you can't ensure it. People will elect the people that they elect. But there was some conversation of saying, how do we get better representation of our people? We've got a very young community. We've got a lot of mum and dads and young children in our community. How do we get some of those people in their 30s and 40s to think about doing something different with their life? And at $50,000, that's not an attractive prospect. So that was part of that conversation. When we talked about moving to the 8 councillor model, given our growth, again, we wanted to have better decision making and more representation of the types of people that live in our district, rather than just more people sitting around our council table. And full-time councillors means that people have the time to attend and be at and around and connect with community groups and events in a way that people that are trying to juggle 2 other jobs, as well as being a councillor or needing to do something full-time, just don't have the capacity to do. There are a couple of questions that you raised with us around 80% of the community not feeling represented. And I was going to get Sarah to talk to that, because I think some of that might be a miscommunication to us in the data that we shared with you.
Yeah, so I think with that question and the one around the 70% not liking the current ward structure, I think it's important to note that we don't have the drill down on the why specifically regarding representation. But it's important to clarify that the preference for accessing council is not via a councillor or community board, but rather direct access is where that is coming for. So it's preference around how they interact with council. So that's direct access, and community organisations are seen as doing this. It may also be important to note that within the research, it's not about having more people, but when the question was posed around what would they like to see or what would make better in terms of recommendations on representing community needs, it was the number one thing that they gave was more engagement and communication at 28%, ahead of 7% saying that they wanted more people or more representation in their area. in the ward-specific sense, the ward-specific feedback, the sense the research gives us is that the current makeup doesn't adequately represent their communities of interest, which is why they're not, I guess, associating or connecting with that ward structure as much as the township level that they are.
Yeah, and I think that communities of interest piece is why we looked to shift West Melton and the Burnham, Rolleston West areas, because we felt through the representation review subcommittee's research and analysis that some move needed to be there. The final proposal didn't include those, and I'll come to that a little bit later. You asked us around why do members of Melbourne community feel they cannot turn to community board for assistance. I can only say that's what we have heard. That is what I live in the Melbourne area. I was a Melbourne councillor before I was the mayor of Selwyn, and people, I didn't, and people don't, that I connect with want to go to the Melbourne Community Board for things. They would rather connect either with the staff, and we have great customer services team, 0800 number, really easy to get a hold of us, and we've shifted the way that we do things so no one ever gets a dial tone or pass to someone for a message. It's always listening to the person and staying with them right through the calls, or they want to talk to their councillor about a local issue and meet over a coffee or have a yarn at a Foursquare, because councillors have those connections, understand the systems and get on with it. And I think, and it was raised by both submitters, there has been a lot of disruption inside the Melbourne Community Board over the last 3 years, which can lead to a lack of trust and an uncertainty about are the people there going to stay there, how well are they connected to the outcomes that we want to see happen. And our council has made sure that we connect in with community associations. And as Mark said, there are a number that have existed for longer than Selwyn District Council has, and we've had good relationships with them, Arthur's Pass, West Melton, community associations. And then over the last 5 years, we've gone through a process of just establishing community committees where we used to have basically, that they weren't incorporated societies, they were committees of council, but that actually restricted the amount of funding they could receive for their projects. It meant that they were a part of council when a lot of what they wanted to say or do might have been against or to challenge council. So we supported them to set up their own incorporated societies and continue to function and support with them. And those that have done that are happy with the relationships that we have, as you heard from Mark. And I know that if you asked West Melton or Arthur's Pass, they would say the same thing. I'll get Steve to talk about the community board costs.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So I think John has done quite a good summary of the total board costs. So the total costs for this financial year, $171,000, which is matched by revenues. Approximately $90,000 of that is the direct board cost, which includes the salaries, the training, conference attendance, and a number of the other smaller grants and funds that they can manage that relates to the delegations, and we'll touch on that question shortly. John's identified the way in which our support charges are charged, and he's talked about 100,000. It's about 110, and that's an overhead charge that's applied across all of council. And as you'll appreciate, it's a big business, and so we've smoothed that cost because there's a lot of staff time that across the year will go into this, and we don't charge by the hour. What is interesting to note is that current balance is running at a deficit at the moment, and it's being funded through a reserve rate, and that's been spread across the 10 years to try and manage and keep that rate fee relatively consistent and low as we can, and draw on the reserve to manage the surplus deficit. And at the moment, it's in a deficit of about $30,000.
When we think about the residents groups and how we had proposed to connect with them, what we were thinking was it would be bi-monthly meetings with all the residents associations invited to attend. We have 21 residents associations across Selwyn. As I mentioned, we've got a large number of townships across the district, and those bi-monthly meetings would be chaired and attended by councillors, which would provide that direct access to council, enable council to be aware of local issues, and that we would have people involved in those not just from the local ward, but from across the wards, so that to reinforce the fact that councillors are elected as Selwyn District Council representatives, not just the award representative, because they're elected from the ward, but they need to look after everyone. And I think part of that feedback in that was actually supported, and people that I talked to liked that idea, because they see the community board as getting in the way and slowing down decision making, and going to a community board to bring something to a meeting a month later to discuss about where it might go, to then have to go to talk to a staff member, when they could just pick up the phone and call council and say, or use the app that we've got that's, snap, send, solve, take a photo of the pothole, send it through, don't have to talk to anyone, the email's gone in 3 clicks, or talk to their local councillor. So it was another level of slowing down action that is unnecessary. Question 9 to us was around West Melton being put back in the Tawera ward in the final proposal, and I guess the rationale you asked us in question 10 around the swing from sidelining what the Representation Review Committee had done around representation to then swing right back again. I think that the conversation for council on that day was not a unanimous discussion or decision. And in the end, the weight of the hearings and what we heard through the final part of the process was the thing that was ringing loudest in people's ears. And so there was little consideration, but what if we do this to West Melton? Because there was a lot of consideration of the voices from the rural areas that said, we want 2 councillors and we want the community board. And so a model that gave the 2 councillors and kept the community board was picked. There had been a map provided to the Representation Review that the majority of councillors said, we'll pick that one. And I'll acknowledge, as Mark raised, there was no consultation with the community on that as an option. So that was only internal committee discussion about would it be appropriate. And I might get Phil talked earlier about the reasons why it was discarded at that time. But the majority of councillors gave weight to what they had just heard and decided that that was the right option. How did the community, question 11 you've asked us, how did the community have the opportunity to make comment and reflect? They had none. It was chosen on the day, and I guess the option that they have is now through the appeal is the only option, and Market and the Rolleston Residents Association has taken it up. Question 12, I think we've answered. You've asked about the 70% dissatisfaction with representation. I think we answered that earlier, but if we haven't, I'm happy to come back to it. And your final question, 13, was how comfortable are we that we're future-proofed and landed on something for the next 6 years? That wasn't one of the things that was addressed in the final decision. There was a lot looking at, does it meet the plus or minus 10%, and does it respond to the submissions that we just received? Not how will this set us up for the next 6 years. If it had, we would have decided on a number that had the Rolleston ward, including whoever was in the Rolleston ward, at a negative number to allow for future growth, and the Malvern and Ellesmere wards at positive numbers to allow for the shift that will continue to happen in our district. So it wasn't something that we went into detail in during the discussion. So Sharon and Phil and Sarah, are there other matters you'd like to just clarify around the things that have been raised?
Yeah. Thanks, Sam. So you asked about the number of residents associations. So we have 21 across the district, of which 13's in Malvern, 5 in Ellesmere, 1 in Rolleston and 2 in Springs. Our intention was to establish a new model formally with, and as Sam alluded to before, having the councillor bring together the chairs of those committees, and work together on engagement and transparency and what is important. And as I alluded to before, really bringing it down to a granular level so that we have that, the good relationship that we have with Rolleston and other committees, is that we replicate that across the whole of the district. I myself, as Chief Executive, I attend Residents Association meetings. I have good connection. I link my relative team and executive in terms of being able to respond and I think we've made some significant inroads in terms of engagement at a council level, but of course always accept that there's always room for improvement. But as a council, we are absolutely committed to do that. In terms of reaching out into the far more rural areas, we have mobile machines that we take out with us, so that if we go to Arthur's Pass or we go to Springfield, that we can bring a mobile unit that allows us to be able to Teams meet or other alternatives. And yes, with technology, every now and again there are some glitches, but you can have that glitch here in Ralston as well as out in Arthur's Pass. But we have the technology and the commitment to follow through into our communities.
Thank you, Phil.
Yeah, you asked a question about why we didn't, whether we considered councillors at large for our election process, and we had, when we went through to speak to the other councils, that was one of their primary reasons for going out, was to see the pros and cons of councils that had gone down the path. Just briefly, the general consensus was that they were costly for council, for people who wanted to run. They were costly to run their campaigns, so they were less attractive. And the mixed, this is the top two things. The mixed model was largely ineffective, and I'm not sure which council it was now. One of the mixed models said that they, if you had a ward councillor and the councillor at large over the same area, then the ward councillor would be almost like the priority councillor for the community, and the councillor at large effectively just became superfluous. So, but we did put that up as one of our considerations. You remember that really colourful sheet that I showed before? We did show that was one of the options that we did consider in our big pool. When the staff gave the final recommendation over the two models that we did put out for consultation, I felt quite proud of the fact that we had reflected what all the feedback has that we'd received and all the deliberation, and we had some pretty robust deliberations during our committee meetings around shapes and sizes and forms. So I guess moving to the final decision, I was left a wee bit. Well, I was surprised that we hadn't addressed the communities of interest more effectively, and I guess that's where that would be. Everything else we can sort of, like, you can say we can look at that, you can justify that, but really not addressing that communities of interest thing was something and I made a comment publicly that that's something that we're going to have to live with now, and we will have to address at some point in the future. I think that's all I've got to say.
Great. And just to add to the at-large conversation, this was, it also came up around the timing of having to make the decision about the voting process. And once we went down a first past the post voting system, then it kind of, like, I think if we'd gone to large, we might have had a deeper conversation about STV, but it all happened the other way around. So you've chosen first past the post, and is that the fairest way to have an at-large election? Maybe, maybe not. And so once we'd made that, though, it made the drivers and the outcomes for at-large to be less. And we put up the graphs before, the maps. I think we put up 8 different options, or there might have been 10, but we looked at over 20. So the ones that we've given to you just kind of are a sample of those that we looked at. There were many, many more. Steve?
Yeah, I think the Commission asked the question on around the delegations for the community, and those delegations have been in place since February 2023. So they do have delegation around supporting advisories, around the ability to recommend to council. They've got the ability to consult with the community and make submission on things around long-term planning and roading matters, restricted around pedestrian crossings, temporary use of footpaths and roads for events, and also providing some advice around speed limits within that Melbourne area. They've got the delegation to provide and to submit on resource management matters. There's a degree of a little bit more active advice around the use of property and parks, Also around assisting in the preparation of management plans or providing feedback on existing management plans when they are up for consultation or change. There's a role in civil defence around providing local intel to the controller at the time of an emergency as to where to best prioritise or place resource. There is a specific area around the delegation to run community awards for the area, and that is something that the community board does hold quite dear, and also to provide community development advocacy, which I think John's portrayed really well today. So that's the sum of the delegations, and I'm happy to share those with you there as public document.
Sarah?
I think my only additional comment that I'd like to make is that in terms of the numbers, while we were pleased with the community turnout for the consultation activity, it still only represents 0.6% of the district. And important to note that the numbers that we had going through the initial research phase versus the consultation phase are very similar as well, but had very different perspectives. So an observation was that there perhaps was more weighting given to the consultation feedback than the research feedback in the final decision.
Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to say in terms of SDC's approach, you know, we understand that these are complex matters, which is why we went out and recruited an independent expert in terms of Murray Strait to support us through this process. And that's really important. And that was the commitment that Council had to getting this right. And I think that in terms of the recommendation that initially went through, it was based around taking into account the communities of interest and the boundary alignments, which made sense, which was the recommendation that the staff had put forward.
I think that covers it from us, Chair Duffy. So, yeah, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today, and happy to answer any further questions.
Well, thanks very much for that summary and the right of reply. I'm going to check with fellow commissioners. Commissioner Bigham.
Kia ora team, thank you. Comprehensive cover off of our questions. I was just interested listening to the list of the community board delegations that you just given. A lot of that was just the ability to provide advice, which actually isn't a delegation. So from what I heard, just trying to quickly note down, the delegations where the community board has actual decision-making power, just correct me if I'm wrong, is restricted to pedestrian crossings, footpaths for events, and running community awards. Would that be correct? Because I think what else I heard was just their ability to contribute and advise into council processes, which is not a delegation.
Yeah. Thank you, Commissioner Bigham. The board has specific delegations to make independent submissions on the long-term plan and on a number of other aspects of local government, whether that's regional council.
Sorry, I get that. I do get that thing, but making submissions is not having actual. Oh, okay. Let me rephrase my question. What decision-making powers does the community board have?
That's better.
What do they get to say? This is how it's going to be, and council abides by that. I'm interested in getting to the, what impact do they actually, what decisions can they make on behalf of their community that actually doesn't have to go through a council process as a submission?
It would be the community wards as it stands at the moment. That goes, that's independently without any throughput into an existing council process governed by the Act. I'm just looking at the range.
I don't think there's any others, to be honest with you.
No,
and I think that's reflective of our situation where we've got 4 wards, 1 community board. If you look back 20 years, we had 3 community boards. Springs ward said no, came very clearly, said we don't want a community board. 6, maybe 9 years ago, this commission again was involved in the removal of the Selwyn Central Community Board at the time. And so there's, I guess the focus for us is on delivering for community. And as we've done that, having another way of working for a different community has means that we don't delegate a whole lot to the community board itself.
Yeah, Kapai, thank you. That's what I was really wanting to drill down to, as to, you know, where do they have the power to make decisions? And can I just also pick up on your comment, Mayor Sam, around, or somebody's comment around the decision to do the 360. I'm coming back to my 360 rationale on the final proposal. The majority of the vote got the final proposal over the line. What was the split? Was it a vast majority of councillors that came back to this position, or how, you know, how was it a unanimous? No, it wasn't, because it was majority. So what was the split? How close was the vote?
It was a close vote. I don't have the breakdown of the numbers in front of me, sorry, but it was certainly a split vote and some heated debate during the conversation around all the issues that we've raised with you today, that the community had raised with us through the process.
Great. So how do you respond to the fact then that there were not that many appeals to the Local Government Commission about the final proposal? Not considering there'd been a lot of engagement in the other parts of the phase. There doesn't seem to be so many people who were too upset about the final proposal in the end.
No, so I think the initial consultation and the pre-consultation, sorry, and the research done was us approaching people to find out, you know, it's not about having to be in your bonnet about a decision. It's actually just trying to say, hey, you live in this district. We want to make sure we do the best by you. So can you give us some information that's going to help us make a good decision? In the end, the people who submitted on our final, our consultation around the proposal had to be in their bonnet, because there was a shift and a change around particularly the rural representation and the removal of the community board. And so we heard that clearly at that point, and council's final decision basically allowed those people to have the win that they sought when they came and talked to us, which was keep the rural representation and keep the community board. I wouldn't expect to hear from all those the same number of people as Sarah said that we had spoken to earlier, because they were just people going about their business that we elicited real and true comments from in their homes and on the street.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Appreciate it.
Thanks for that questioning, Commissioner Bigham, because if you hadn't, I was going to. So we've got that real clear. Just check with Commissioner Bull. Are you okay?
Just one question. You said you're wanting to establish a new model with the 21 resident associations. How far down the track is that?
We could set that up as soon as we had decided what the if we were moving to 8 councillors and that had been the final proposal, it would have been set up this term. And there's nothing stopping us from setting it up anyway, because I think it's a better model for us to be able to communicate and engage our community in the decisions that council makes. But with the uncertainty around this decision, the continuation of the community board, and also not wanting to step on their toes because they do some of that work to connect with the communities in that area, we thought that it was best wait until you guys give us a final decision. We know with certainty where we're going, and we're not setting something up that feels a bit grey that we have to adjust really quickly and looks like we didn't know what we were doing to begin with. So I still think it's got merit. Would like to see it occur, and I'm running for re-election. If I'm re-elected as the mayor, it'll be a conversation that our council has in October.
Fair enough, and thank you very much for your presentation today.
Okay. Thanks, Mayor Sam. I think that we'll generally agree that we've concluded that depth of process.
Brendan, can I just ask one more question?
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. I missed you. Sorry.
No. Oh, good, because it just occurred to me too, as talking about thank you, Gwen, for that prompt around the residents associations. I just want to be clear, if there is a movement towards engaging with residents associations, that how they're how they're made up. when we asked Mark about that, he said it was open to all. So are residents associations, are they made up of ratepayers and renters, or is it mainly ratepayers? Because then you're missing a huge potential lot of input from people who don't own the homes but are renters. Do we know the demographics of those associations and how they're constituted? That's really what I'm interested in, because 21 is a lot. And if it's just the ratepayers you're talking to, then you're missing potentially those awesome people who you might want to stand as councillors.
Yeah. No, thanks for the question. Most of them are residents associations. All the new ones we've set up are residents associations, which are open to anyone to be a part of. Ratepayers, as far as the name goes, is a slightly older term and does imply something different. But as Mark clarified, that might be their name, but it's not the way that they operate. And this wouldn't replace our current engagement, and we have strategies that we've just approved last year around how do we connect with older people in our district, how do we connect with our younger people in our district, how do we make sure that Māori and Pacific are engaged in the work that we're doing. So it's not to undo any of that good work, it would only be to enhance the things that are going on. Phil?
Yeah, I was just going to say that it is for Rolleston Residents Association, that is people who live in Rolleston. Rent rates it makes no difference. And in fact, it goes a step further. In fact, I know that they are embarking on with us, the councillors, that is, a plan to try and make sure that the representation is more fuller and more complete and more rounded in every way.
And I'll just add to that, often people, and you'll know this from your own experiences in local government, if you are on the Residents Association, you're probably also running the netball club and you're doing something with the PTA, and you're connected in lots of other ways. So the people that have the space and time and desire to be a part of this aren't just picking it because it's local government connected or because of the prestige of the name of being on the Residents Association. It's because they're community people that are connected, and we want to make sure that that connection flows right through to council.
Okay, kia ora koutou. Thank you very, very much.
All righty. I'm now determining that we are done. And just make the acknowledgement to Phil, Sarah, and Steve. Thanks for the effort and the contributions there. To CEO Sharon, job well done, and to Mayor Sam, you can be comfortable that you hold the record for running running the hearing process longer overdue than any that we've done this term. So there's a little gong for you. So we've gone a solid hour and more, way over. But I still think we would agree the process has been respectful. It's been appropriately detailed. Everybody's had a fair go. And now it's the Commission's role to go away and deliberate, and we'll make our decision in due course. You all know that we have to have all these resolved by 10 April, which is not that far away. So just trust us to get into that process, and we'll get that out in due course. So thanks again, and with your indulgence, we'll just close with the Commission's karakia, and then we'll move on to enjoy the rest of our day. So our Commission karakia. Unahia, unahia, unahia iru. I te uru tapanui ki wātea ki mama te tanaka. Te tinana te wairua i te aratakatu, koirā e rongo. So kārea aki ki ronga ki wātea, ki wāta, eira ki wātea, hopai.